This happened back in my final year in college. It wasn't weird for me to study in the college till late into the night. I would probably have made the college my home if it weren't for the fact that the college staff made it mandatory for all students to be off campus by midnight. My usual routine was for me to stop all my work by 11:15 p.m. and head to the nearest bus stop to wait for the bus that arrived at 11:30 p.m. On one particular night, I accidentally fell asleep while studying, and sadly, none of the other students bothered to wake me up, and I must have slept till pretty late, as I was violently shaken awake by the college's night warden. He shone a bright light in my face and demanded I packed up immediately and left. I muttered my apologies and stuffed all my books into my backpack and walked out of the library, my usual haunt for late night studying. Normally there would be cars of some staff and privileged students in the car park, but today it was deserted and the lights alongside the road opposite my campus were all switched off, giving off an eerie feel to the overall atmosphere. I checked my watch for the time and to my horror, realized that it was closing into 11:45 p.m. I sprinted to the bus stop just as I saw a bus that I could have taken leave. I worriedly began looking through the bus timing stated at the bus stop and saw that there was only one other bus that I could take. The bus left me further from my house than I usually got off, which meant that I would have to walk for about 10 extra minutes to get to my house. That was the least of my worries, as the bus that I would have to board was notoriously called the midnight bus in my college. Only 3 students had taken it as far as the gossip could go, and they all mysteriously disappeared the next day. Now, I would have brushed it off as hoaxes, which is what I did at first. That is, until their disappearances were documented in the local newspaper. Unnerved, I sat down at the bus stop and began waiting for the bus to arrive. Promptly at midnight, I saw the bus stop in front of the bus stop and I jolted upright. I hadn't heard the rumbling of the tires or anything that would indicate the arrival of the bus. The doors opened swiftly and a cold gust of wind hit me in the face, making me shiver. Mind you, I was wearing a jacket at the time. The bus driver was an average-looking guy. Nothing special was there to note of him, except for the fact that he never once looked at me when the doors opened, or when I got on board the bus. When I boarded the bus, I noticed an elderly couple sitting together directly behind the bus driver, and a middle-aged man sitting just in front of the back doors of the bus. I sat down on the seats next to him, and noticed that he looked terribly pale. I didn't think much of it and looked out into the pitch-black surroundings of the night. This wasn't unusual for me, as the only difference between my normal ride and this was that the street lights were off, not that it allowed me to see anything anyways. I suddenly saw that my surroundings became unfamiliar to me, and rows after rows of houses suddenly began passing by the bus. I reassured myself that it was just a new route the bus was taking. However, I could not shake off the feeling that something about the houses were off. I tried looking harder at the houses to figure out where I was exactly, but I couldn't. It looked like someplace out of town, and the numbers of the houses never changed, and they all had the same weird font. As if things couldn't possibly get worse, it suddenly started raining, and now all I could see was water pouring down. Not more than 5 minutes later, the man beside me suddenly raised his voice at me and shouted, "What was that, punk? What did you say?" I hadn't heard anyone say anything since I got on the bus, and I knew for a fact that I hadn't uttered a single word since I got on the bus. Confused, I told the man, "Sorry, sir. I didn't say anything at all." "You dare lie?" I didn't understand why he started a racket out of literally nothing. I tried defending myself while trying not to offend him. "Sir, you must be mistaken. I haven't uttered a single word since I got on the bus." He stood up and began rolling up his sleeves, as if he was ready to pummel me to the ground when the bus driver stomped to our spot and yelled at the both of us. I will not have rowdy behavior on board this bus. You two are to leave immediately. He stormed back to the front door of the bus, probably to open the door. As he was doing so, I heard the elderly woman at the front speak for the first time. My dear, won't you come sit with us where it's nice and quiet? Her voice was so gentle, and I began walking towards her. When I looked at the front of the bus and saw the bus driver looking at me with wide eyes, I could tell he was petrified, but I didn't understand why. So I stood in my spot and looked at the man beside me. He had the same facial expression. The bus driver opened all the doors of the bus and signaled with a shake of his head for us to get off. Then something unexpected happened. Both the man and I walked off via the back door of the bus, and so did the bus driver, except he did from the front door. When all three of us got off, the man and the bus driver began walking towards a house opposite the street. I felt scared and worried as my parents would not know where I was, and the cops would probably be at my school searching for me. Anyways, the area behind me was a wooded area, and I could barely see past the first tree. By this time, I was drenched from head to toe and was freezing my skin off. I decided to get back on the bus. At least the old people were friendly. As soon as I took one step on board the bus, the lights went off and all I could see was the starless night through the windows of the bus from the inside. I jumped back out and decided against my will to follow the men to wherever they were going. I sprinted to catch up with them and asked where they were going. Strangely, they didn't reply and continued walking. Now I felt really angry. First, the man got me kicked off the bus because he thought he heard me scold him. And now, the bus driver and the men are walking towards some random house in the middle of nowhere. The street didn't have any markings on it to indicate the traffic direction, or a sign to indicate the street name. They were both a few steps ahead of me, and they never once acknowledged each other's presence or even mine after we got off the bus. They were both outside the house compound when suddenly I felt a light tug on my shoulder. I spun around and saw the elderly couple behind me, puzzled as to how they were able to catch up to me despite the fact that I had ran towards the man and continued walking briskly. I was caught off guard and jumped back in fright. I heard footsteps speeding up behind me, but I didn't know who it was. The elderly man saw it too and immediately grabbed my hand and began walking back towards the bus, which was now the only source of bare illumination in the pitch-black surroundings. He had a grip that was cold as ice and too hard for his age, and I was scared as to what other quirks he had. The elderly woman was ahead of us and seemed to be muttering something inaudible to herself. I didn't question their actions and walked along with them. Suddenly, I saw a blade hack through the old man's hand, and he continued walking forward, as if he was unaware that his hand was chopped clean off. The bus driver was the one who did it, and before I could scream or do anything, he swept me clean off my feet and bolted into the house's compound, after which the men quickly closed the gates. I screamed at them, venting all my feelings and puzzled as to what the heck was going on. The bus driver said, "Go into the house and we'll talk." Inside the house, the man, I'll call him Jack, lighted a candle and placed it on the table, which we all sat around. The bus driver then started explaining what happened. The elderly couple which you saw earlier were not humans. They had no feet, as you'll see later. They are vengeful spirits who are out to claim unsuspecting victims like you. When they were alive, they caused big problems for bus drivers like us and me, because they acted homeless and would often stand in the middle of the road for the bus drivers to stop and let them in. We often had to refuse, because the only one time that one of us let them in, they killed the driver of the bus. One of the passengers had an axe on board for some reason, and threatened to kill them if they didn't leave immediately. They resisted, and eventually the man with the axe couldn't bring himself to kill them, so instead he chopped their legs clean off. Their temporary disability allowed the frantic passengers to run out of the bus for safety, which caused a mini stampede. They were killed when everybody ran off the bus, and the house we're in is where they used to stay. Nothing in this house works ever. When they were alive, people in the neighborhood thought they were cult members or something, and managed to convince authorities to cut off the house's electricity supply. By this point, I was scared out of my wits and managed to mumble out a question which I had. Why did the houses repeat then? Both the bus driver and Jack looked at each other in shock, and for the first time outside the bus, Jack said something. And this time when he did, I knew that there was something in for all of us. You saw the houses repeating? He said in a wavering voice. Yeah, the houses appeared randomly and they were the same houses over and over again. The driver told us to move to the second floor of the house before the conversation could go any further. The stairs were made of wood and had begun to rot from the damp atmosphere present, not to mention that they also creaked terribly. Jack got out a bunch of keys and took a few seconds before finding a specific door and opening it to a room. When we all got inside, he locked the door from the inside and deadbolted it too. I noticed that the room had one other door on the ceiling, which probably led to the roof or attic of the house. The bus driver mentioned for me to follow him to the window. He told me to look out. I looked out just in time to see the old lady picking up the severed hand and taking a huge bite out of it, which was followed by blood spurting out of the hand and onto the road. The old man walked beside her and, to my horror, also took a huge chunk out of the hand before reattaching it to himself, as if it were a piece of Lego. Then I looked at their feet and saw for the first time. They had no feet. They just hovered around the ground. They were wearing long pants, so I didn't blame myself for not noticing that. I turned back to the driver and Jack, who were expecting an answer from me. I told them what I saw and Jack asked whether they were looking at me, to which I replied no. A wave of relief swept across their faces until rattling noises on the window began.